You work at the State News and
Yes.
do a lot of fantastic reporting about the which desk are you on?
So I'm on the regional desk as the breaking news and public safety reporter.
Right, and so we are bringing you on for none of that, like absolutely none of that. So you were on the 1909 last week, and you did an incredible feature story about this sophomore who created this app and like was tracking the MSU parking police, basically. And that was a great story. Then you were on House Lights to discuss the royal family.
Yeah.
And Hannah, well, I'm sorry, you are Hannah. Liz said something along the lines of like, you're on a podcast roll.
House Lights was next.
What's next? Who knows? Sports
next?
Roundtable. Do you know a lot about sports?
No, but I'd be glad to put in my 2 cents on what the one thing I do know.
What's the one thing you do know?
That Caitlin Clark's making records.
That's so true. And you know what? Women's issues.
Exactly.
Women's issues on
Women's
Sports
issues.
Roundtable.
Yes.
And so what's next? Sports Roundtable is next. So we
Why
are
not?
committing to the bit. We are putting you on, and you said that I guess let me ask you, what's the one thing you know about sports?
Yeah, so when Liz said that, I was like, that would be hilarious because I only know one thing about sports, which is that Caitlin Clark's setting records.
Right, and she is.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to start just to give viewers a little bit of context. As far as like your interest level in sports, did you ever play sports as a kid? What where are you coming from?
Yeah, so I've never really been athletically inclined. Growing up, I did play tennis in high school. Was I good?
Like for the high school team though?
Yes, for the high school
okay,
team.
but like that's more than me because like I'm somebody that does like actively involved. I'm the host of a sports podcast, and I tried out for the baseball team, didn't even make the cut for the freshman team, and just stopped playing.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the varsity team by default, just because I was an upperclassman, and there wasn't really a lot of upperclassmen, so I just kind of got thrown on there. But growing up, I never really watched any sports besides football. Because I grew up watching football because my parents and my whole family are huge MSU fans, and I would tailgate, and we were such big fans. We fly to bowl games.
So you're big fans.
Yeah, I went to the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Peach Bowl, but this was all when I was really young, and I was kind of just there for the vibes.
Perfect.
I don't think I really got the gist of football until college when I started going to the games with my friends and they kind of explained it to me. Same thing with basketball. I never really understood basketball really until I got to college, and one of my best friends, she's a huge basketball fan. She has season tickets and she kind of explained it to me. So I don't really keep up with sports that often besides football. So that's like when like it was like, oh, you should go on Sports Roundtable. I just thought it was so funny.
So yeah, and it's crazy, and like, and I love that you're here to discuss this because we got a big topic on the table today.
Yes,
and it is Caitlin Clark, none other than Caitlin Clark. She has been, in a word, insane. Like, so I guess like the context that a lot of people put, or the lens that they view Caitlin Clark through, is that she is a lot like Steph Curry, who is an NBA player and is known for how good of a shooter he is, right? So like, which is something that's kind of been like with sports in general. Basketball players have gotten better at shooting as time goes on, and they've realized that if you shoot more 3-pointers, you have a higher chance of winning, because if you can improve your 3-point accuracy, 3 points is more than 2, right? We would agree on that.
Yeah.
Right? So that there's a more probability of you scoring more points if you just you shoot more threes more often, and you get better at shooting them.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess like from your perspective, and I guess, you know, what have you been hearing about Caitlin Clark? And I guess I want to know like what is she getting you interested in, whether it's women's basketball or just basketball in general?
Yeah, because I feel like I kind of have that outsider perspective just because I don't really keep up with sports that often. The thing I like about Caitlin Clark and what she's doing for women's basketball is, like, a few years ago, if you were to ask me, like, okay, name 3 basketball players, I would probably say, like, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, all men. But then if you're like, oh, like, name 3 actors, oh, well, like, Meryl Streep, Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, it's more like...
We could go on. It's more diverse.
It's more diverse. So the thing I like about Caitlin Clark is she's kind of making that name for herself. And, I get news headlines I get notifications. And so I always get, like, sports notifications. And I feel like half the sports notifications I've been getting have been about Caitlin Clark. And she's kind of putting that name out there and not just being like, look at me, but, like, look at us. Like, bringing that attention to women's college basketball and eventually the WNBA.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it is it's going to be crazy for the NBA or the WNBA. I'm really excited to see how the WNBA gets affected because I think that there are, and I'm not going to make a case for one way or the other, but there are people that have argued that the WNBA, some of their decisions that they've made haven't necessarily been the best to market the WNBA or, do certain things for the WNBA. So I guess, like, it's a tricky situation that the WNBA has always been put in because, like, sometimes, I mean, I was watching a couple of games before and they were like, I heard about them and they were like on Facebook video. I'm like, what are we doing you know what I mean? Like, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be one, but I'm just like, it seems a little, I don't know that I would broadcast on Facebook video, for, like, if I'm a major sports league, right? So that was weird. And it was like an exclusive on Facebook video. So I guess like, I think that Caitlin Clark can have a real impact and get real people to watch this league that historically has struggled to attract a viewership. And I think a lot of it does have to do with, like, media investment, There are a number of reasons. I'm not going to say that, Caitlin Clark is the only reason that the WNBA is going to be saved. Yeah. But it'll be interesting. And I think, and I guess, like, what else, do you know any other college basketball players? Yeah, so the first time I ever became aware of who Caitlin Clark was I was on TikTok and people were talking about Iowa's matchup against Louisiana and Angel Reese. And they were talking about kind of, I don't know if it was like beef, but I think it was Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark were kind of like taunting each other on the court. People on TikTok were kind of commenting on it and being like, that's immature behavior, blah, 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 blah. But then people were like, men do that to each other all the time on the court in men's basketball. But because it's like two girls who are very passionate about the sport, it's like bratty and bad behavior. It was very like odd. So I actually became aware of those two names at the same time. And then people were kind of trying to pit them against each other. And I think both of them came out and were like, look, like, we're both two women passionate about the game who are at the top of the league. And so I feel like also Angel Reese has kind of thrown her name out there too as well to kind of bring that attention too. And what do you think that, like, I know that you said that you didn't grow up the biggest sports fan and you've kind of gotten into it to a little bit of a degree, but does part of it, like I'm obviously, I identify as a man, like, born man, right? So I guess, like, I don't have the experience of, like, not seeing representation of white males on the court. So like, whereas, with women, I feel like it's much harder. There's also a lot of men that sort of gatekeep sports to a certain degree. And so do you think that you would, or just women in general would feel more comfortable getting into sports, or not necessarily comfortable, maybe that's not the right word, but more enthusiastic about it if women's sports were treated with the same sort of gravity that men's sports are.
Well, like growing up, you kind of learn about the wage gap between men and women, especially in sports. Men's sports bring in so much money, and it's always been like there's not really much people could do about it because more people do attend their games do get more viewership, so it's just natural that they would be making as much more money as they do than women's athlete players. And I think that the more attention being brought to women's sports, more specifically women's basketball, opens up the opportunity for more women to view athletics as a career. I feel like a lot of women who are very good at their sport don't think they can make it very far because they won't make as much money as, say, like a male soccer player would make over a female player. So I feel like kind of bringing this attention, and, my roommate, she's a cheerleader here at MSU. And so she cheers both men's and women's sports. And she's like a big reason why I've kind of gotten more into athletics, because she always talks about the women's basketball team. She loves to cheer their games, and she cheered their tournament last year. This year she cheered the men's tournament, but she told me, and this might need to be fact checked, but that the women's NCAA tickets cost more than the men's this year.
That's crazy.
Which, if that's true, that's huge improvement.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And I guess that is crazy. I think a lot of it does have to do, because I like that you brought up the point about if you're a girl and you're growing up and you are interested in, if you're playing a sport, right?
Yeah.
It's much harder to want to take something, not I don't want to say you would be taking it unseriously, but it's hard to have that motivation when there might not be a league that you would find yourself in. And I mean, hockey's having a moment right now with the PWHL, and because there were 2 leagues, but they weren't really that big, and they were kind of in protest of each other. They were both battling at odds, and now they've both combined and merged, to which is something that nobody thought was going to happen, and now they are one big professional women's hockey league, which is very good for just the sport of hockey in general. And people in Michigan are upset because there's not a Detroit team, and there's also no college women's team at all. So that's an issue too, because Michigan exports a lot from the men's and the women's side. They export a lot of good hockey players. But if you're a woman growing up in Michigan, you can't go to school here and play hockey. You have to leave the state, and that's a big deal breaker for a lot of people. Yeah. I was hearing some people who used to play college hockey, some at University of Minnesota Duluth and some at other universities, who said that they played with a lot of the people in the PWHL, and it pursued a what you would call a real degree, because they knew that the space in the professional women's just in the sport is so limited, right? So that is interesting, and I guess kind of just to leave it off. Do you think what do you think you'll find yourself watching the WNBA? Or though it's hard because it's how do you root for someone? I rooted for Nia Clouden, when I think she's on LA's team now, but she graduated from MSU. Right. And she was a couple of years ago or a year ago or something like that. And so I rooted for her when she was in the WNBA. And, but other than that, Detroit doesn't have a team. So so that's hard.
Yeah. I feel because even men and women's basketball, I kind of watch from a distance, kind of just see what people post on their stories, who won, stuff like that. So as someone who doesn't typically watch sports, I think I'll still probably watch from a distance, but I feel like I am very intrigued by Caitlin Clark, and I feel like she is drawing more women into viewing the sport who typically wouldn't. So I could see myself watching a game just to see the history she's making, because I typically I watched the most recent basketball game because I wanted to see my roommate on the court cheering. Yeah. So that kind of is what got me into it. But I did want to bring up kind of like how I was talking about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and the criticism they were facing earlier. I saw a tweet actually yesterday that was a picture of a Stanford women's basketball player. She had like this long blonde hair and was like tall. And this guy tweeted the picture and was like, if Caitlin Clark looked like this, maybe I would watch her play. And someone quote tweeted it because luckily I typically don't get hateful stuff like that on my feed. But the quote tweet is what came up on my feed, which was someone being like, you could be as prominent of a player as Caitlin Clark and set the record she set, and you'll still face that discrimination. It's still, you can never win.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a crazy thing to see, is that even though she has made all these steps, there's still that
pushback and that. And
yeah.
That's really tough.
So I'm hoping that as she goes through her career, and like same thing with Angel Reese, people have been a few months ago on TikTok, I kept seeing people talking about her grades, that she didn't have good enough grades and didn't go to class enough. I'm like, when have we ever discussed a male basketball player's grades?
That's crazy because because I mean anybody that goes to MSU for football or basketball would not get into the school on merit. Like, there's no way.
U of M, too.
Right. Like, well, especially U of M.
Especially U of M.
But, like, most of the Big Ten schools, I'm pretty sure, I wouldn't be surprised if it's all the Big Ten schools. Like, if you're a really good basketball player and you're here on scholarship, there is no way that you would make it here on merit. I just don't believe it for a second.
Yeah. So like I wonder, as these female players make more of a name for themselves and become more prominent, if that kind of sexism will be more brought to light and people will kind of realize how ridiculous it is. Because like that hateful tweet, there were so many replies that were like, what are you talking about? Why does that matter? And so I'm kind of hoping with them making these records and making these names for themselves that people will kind of realize how ridiculous it is to hold women to this constant standard.
Yeah, you do see that, though, with a lot of other things. I mean, people have always hated gay people, but once more and more people started to, once it became more socially acceptable, I think that you started to see people who are very hateful come out of the woods, more, than they would otherwise. And I think that just goes for really any sort of anything. There's always those people who think or feel a certain way, but they don't really it's not necessarily as public, they don't have a big sign on their face that says I hate women or something. So you know what I mean? So yeah, it is interesting. And Caitlin Clark's what she's done, it's crazy though too, because it took me a second to grow on Caitlin Clark, because when I was so mad, but I couldn't be because she's Caitlin Clark. I was so mad when she scored on the last second of the game against Michigan State to beat them. Michigan State almost beat Iowa with Caitlin Clark.
And that's another thing too. Imagine all the people that tuned in to watch that matchup and saw the fight MSU put up against her. Yeah. That brings awareness to MSU women's basketball team.
Which is doing much better than it has been in recent years.
They've been doing great, and their new coach from last year too.
Right. Yes. Robin Freilich, love her. Doing a great job, obviously.